Welcome to Power Politics, where we prepare you for your next political conversation. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, a political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, also a political science professor here at the University of Houston. Thanks for hanging out with us and talking politics. It's an exciting week, lots going on, but I feel like I say that every single week.
You say that the same thing every single week.
But we're literally in the middle of the heat of session, right? This is crunch time for the Texas House, Texas Senate, mostly Texas House. They get a lot of the pressure, but also tremendous news coming out of Washington, right? We also have Donald Trump doing all kinds of different things. So this is a big, exciting week. The first thing actually involves a former president, and that is Joe Biden, right? Some sad news, actually. He was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. The question has been, of course, how can he recover from this? Is this going to be something that he can bounce back from in terms of his health? But then there are also, of course, political questions, which is how we make our living, right? If we made our living as, medical doctors, we'd be doing that mostly. Maybe on the side, you're doing some of that, but generally speaking,
well, no, I don't have a license, so I do not do that on the side.
You don't practice medicine; you just sort of give advice. It was always very helpful, I have to say. But that's one issue that the Biden kind of legacy has been shaped by, and the concern is that this was something that wasn't disclosed to the American people. Now, there's a kind of sort of conspiracy element to this, right, where people like Donald Trump Jr. and like Ronnie Jackson, a member of Congress here from Texas, is saying, like, you should have told us. This is something you definitely would have known. Doctors in the Biden camp pushing back, saying, look, this isn't something they check for. This is actually true. Like, at some point, they stop checking for prostate cancer. They figure something else is going to kill you, which may be true, but it also may be prostate cancer, which hopefully doesn't happen in this case. But this has sort of become a political storyline about the Biden legacy. And obviously the kind of nature of this really affects what Democrats do and how they're perceived. As an aside, the kind of statistical reporting about the kind of coalition of Democrats has come out saying that they lost in every single category. Every single group that they were like winning in, they lost in the 2024 election. So it's not a great moment for Democrats. And it just kind of reinvigorated this debate about what Democrats are going to do next, right? Like, the leaders are ailing and they don't have a real strategy. Donald Trump is sort of doing what he wants to do, including just taking planes from other nations, right? Which we'll talk about in a second too. So I guess it's a long preamble to the question for you, and that is sort of how this affects the Democrats in the present term, but also how it affects Joe Biden's legacy in the long term.
I mean, I think if you want to be fair with Joe Biden's legacy, you have to separate the policy outcomes from the rest. And that means the politics, the potential cover-ups, the new book, what is it? Original Sin. About Taper and CNN host and Thompson. Try to separate that, because you have a couple of big goals, right? You have the infrastructure bill. You have that is a big Build Better, whatever.
Build Back Better,
The Reduction in Inflation Act. So you have, in terms of policies, very good policies that are significantly tainted by these political issues, right? The alleged cognitive decline. Now we have access to some of those tapes. We can hear it. Everybody sort of knew it, but everybody sort of did not know at the time what was going on.
And there's a fear that, like, it was sort of covered up or swept under the rug. The audio snippets are pretty damning. They are pretty clear that the president at the time, Joe Biden, didn't have control of sort of what he was like doing. He didn't seem to have a real kind of focus. He rambled a bit. Now, this happens to everyone and happens to me all the time.
Absolutely.
But I'm not the leader of the free world, and I don't have a kind of party, waiting for me to do a good thing so that they can win. This sort of different kind of characteristics here. So, we hold presidents to these high standards on purpose. I guess the question is whether we're holding Joe Biden to too high a standard. He is, after all, 80 plus years old, and he's been in Washington for, since the dinosaurs, roamed the earth. So, I mean, that's that's just a fact that Democrats are going to have to grapple with. And I think that the kind of blame Biden politics has become, kind of just at its total apex, right? You're seeing this not just as a Biden health question, but also as like everything Biden tried to do, like the IRA, like we'll talk about the budget in a second, they're trying to undo that too. So this whole kind of thing is just one of these sort of moments where it became very political very fast.
Right. And on the other hand, if you want to have a positive spin,
always good.
Yes, if you can. This gives Democrats the opportunity to have a hard reset, right? It's like when your laptop is not working or anything like that, you push the power button 20 seconds so the thing goes
angrily pushing it.
Go back and that's it, and then enter into the BIOS and just like click F2 to see what's going on. I think that gives them the opportunity to have this reset and figure out what's going to be the plan for 2026. And I think all the pieces are there. Everything has been one way or the other kind of destroyed, leveled down.
That's a great point, yeah.
So now
it's like everything's been leading to this moment.
Exactly. Yeah. So now they have the opportunity. It's like, knock yourself out.
Yeah.
What are you kind of going to come up with?
Yeah, kind of like what's next, right?
Right.
The Democrats have kind of hit rock bottom in a way. And, I mean, the numbers kind of bear this out, and that's, I think, a good point for a reset. But I also want to talk about the way that this affects Joe Biden's legacy. I think about these questions a lot because I, with a co-author and colleague, run the Presidential Greatness Project. We do surveys of people, especially scholars, on presidential greatness. And so we had scholars that told us that they thought that Joe Biden's legacy was pretty good. His numbers were in the teens. For a president to kind of initially show up on the survey that high was pretty surprising to us. So the fact then that a lot of stuff came out after this, right, with the cognitive decline in theory, as well as the pardon of Hunter Biden, these all became kind of things that like weren't really known about. So as they've come out, it definitely is going to hurt his legacy. Presidential legacies are very American as a phenomenon. Like this isn't something a lot of other kind of countries think about. And it's not just about the policies you pass, as you said. That'll be something that can be undone. It can be washed over. It can be spent around. But what can't be undone is the sort of legacy of how you treat the rest of government, how you handle the American people, the way that you interact with your party and how successful you are. It's more like presidential vibes than outcomes, but that's why it's hard to kind of do it. But Barack Obama talked about this. He says basically this is like the presidential paragraph, right? What is the thing that's going to be your paragraph?
Correct.
And it's always being rewritten. So you have to have this as part of it, right? And being a one-term president, he's not going to have as much time after, given his age and things. But the fact is that this is sort of how we think about legacy. And so he has to be kind of, and that's why they've been so like aggressively attempting to counteract some of these big questions, right? But they linger, and it has political implications for like what's going on today as well as for Biden's legacy. So we'll kind of see how this forms out over the next few weeks. But let's talk about the current president and some of the legal issues that have been transpiring around, in particular, Venezuelans, which seem to be a very hot topic. Two things happened this last week at the Supreme Court of relevance. One is that the court allowed for the Trump administration to end certain kinds of protected status for about 300,000 Venezuelans. And the court also ordered the Trump administration not to deport any more people under the auspices of the Alien Enemies Act, because they're going to review it, right? Neither of these things are permanent. These are definitely temporary in the sense that the court still has to decide if this is legal or not. But this is still a kind of pointed moment, especially for the latter, in that the court could have said, yeah, you can keep deporting people under the auspices of this act, but they didn't. So how they'll rule on this, we don't know, but this is still a pretty big moment for the Trump administration, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, getting rid of TPS, temporary protective status for Venezuelans. TPS is a policy that allows the federal government to give certain people some protections from deportation due to natural disasters, political turmoil in a home country, so on and so forth. And that's, I guess, the main sentiment of that policy. So Venezuela's got that protective status given the situation in Venezuela. You're talking about 350,000 Venezuelans on this thing.
Which is a lot. I mean,
it's a lot and could potentially, right now, as it stands, given that TPS is gone, right, potentially they can be deported.
Deported. Okay, yeah.
As simple as that, right? Obviously, it's not as simple as that, but that is removing removing TPS allows the federal government to deport them. They know where they are because they're registered. Right? Given that they have no protections, the federal government and Trump has a lot of people that the Trump administration can deport and increase those deportation numbers out of the blue.
Well, that's kind of my question. It seems like what you're hinting at. This is sort of a political determination. The New York Times this weekend reported that the administration had to carefully craft the determination about what Venezuela was doing in terms of their relationship with this gang that they say the federal government says is the kind of cause of some of the violence that's happening. This is the invasion, in quotes. And so I guess the question is like, this is just sort of pretext to be able to say that we want to make this change. We want to be able to deport more people. We want to be able to have the power under the Alien Enemies Act to do this.
Well, it's their narrative, and it's the difference that many communities, right, including Republicans, are really questioning. Because the premise of the campaign was we are going to deport criminals, and we're going to deport the people that we do not want here because they're criminals, they're bad people, so on and so forth. So everyone was like, okay, yes,
Sounds
of course,
good,
that's a plan, thumbs up. The problem is that now people that are getting deported are regular members of a particular community that work, that worship, that, you know, go to 4th of July parties, so on and so forth. So that creates a void, and the communities are saying like, wait a minute, you said that they're criminals, but my neighbor is not a criminal. He's a pastor. He's, you know, the plumber, whatever it is, right? A teacher, I don't know, whatever. So that creates that void. So having that, right, and using potentially 300,000 plus Venezuelans that are registered, that you have done due diligence, that you know who they are, et cetera, it's very, 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 very unlikely that these are the hardcore criminals that you want to deport.
No, and the court is insisting on this being done right, and they should, right? That's a due process question, which is what the court said was the problem for the deportations that are already taken place under the Alien Enemies Act, saying like you have to be able to make sure that you've got this correct before you deport people.
Correct.
It didn't seem like they were, and so the court said, let's just wait. There were dissents on the court. They didn't say who wrote it, but they did say that there were dissenting members, which makes sense. I mean, there's conservatives on the court who say, regardless of what happens, the president should have the power to be able to deport people under this act. So that is really the crux of the question. And how the rule, like, we don't know. I mean, we can speculate all kinds of ways, but that'll be something they're going to have to kind of get to, and obviously something that's going to really shape the Trump administration's legacy when it comes to how they're able to, you know, apply the immigration policy to these different countries. Speaking of legacies, Trump 2.0 has been largely fought over legal issues, about executive orders, about broad pronouncements, about how Bruce Springsteen looks old and Taylor Swift isn't popular anymore. Like all of these things are all kind of happening at once. But mostly it's been just sort of what the president thinks. Well, they actually have to legislate too. They're trying, Geronimo, to legislate. So this week, the House Republicans in particular are fighting to get what Donald Trump and the group of Republicans fighting for it called the Big Beautiful Bill. One huge budget bill. They have got a framework in place. Now, as of this recording, they haven't passed it yet. There's still lots of little details to work out, but they have gotten way farther than I thought that they would. The compromises have been pretty interesting to see because, look, if you're Mike Johnson, you're the Speaker of the House, you've got such difficult parameters here to work with, right? You've got the Freedom Caucus members who want to cut spending. You've got the mods who say you can't cut the IRA spending from Biden's like green legacy because it's going to kill some of these programs in our departments. Like there's a lot of kind of things that have to work around. There are people who want the SALT cap to be increased, which is sort of the, you know, you can sort of deduct your state income tax for the states that have it. So there's a lot of different moving parts here. But like to his credit, he's basically kind of gotten to the point where this has all been sort of solved. By the way, the Senate is going to say, okay, well, great idea, great job, rip it up, start again. That's a different problem. But this is a bill that does basically what Trump wanted to do. It extends the Trump-era tax cuts. That's going to cost about $4 trillion. It ends the federal tax on tips, which is a Trump campaign promise. I didn't think they'd get there. Maybe they won't, but that's a big one. A child tax credit by $500 is increased. SALT deduction looks like it'll increase to about $40,000. some controversy, though, and that is that it's going to cut about about $625 billion from Medicaid. Now, the president came to the caucus last week and said, don't F with Medicaid.
Right.
And that's not something Trump normally does, swear, that is, but he swore in this. They've definitely F'd with Medicaid, as it were. So I guess the sort of question is, is this enough to appease Republicans on both sides? And is it something that the Senate is going to be okay with?
It's like when you have trying to, I guess, conduct some arbitrage between kids that are fighting, right?
They're trying to fight over a toy train.
Yes.
There's only one train.
Exactly.
Okay.
And most of the times, those things do not end up in the best possible scenario for the parties involved.
Right.
So
everyone's mad.
Exactly. So
but isn't everyone being mad a sign that that no one is better off, and that's kind of where politics is?
But yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But the problem here is that it has important implications for the midterm elections.
Yes.
If you got $625 billion from Medicare and Medicare, you're going to have significant problems.
Yes.
Like a lot of problems.
Like 10 million people off healthcare
Yes.
problems.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is a huge problem.
I'm surprised the moderates went for this, right? I mean, this is something that's going to definitely hurt their district. It cuts a bunch of stuff from like we said, like the IRA, and cuts food stamps, education programs.
Right.
Their districts are going to be hurt by this.
Oh, yeah.
And they're probably going to hear about it.
Right. Then, on the other hand, you increase the federal deficit to around $3.8 billion.
The what?
Yeah, sure.
What does that mean? Yeah.
Nothing. It's completely
Almost
irrelevant.
nothing. But yeah, and part of the deal is that it increases the the cap by $4 trillion. The U.S. deficit is at almost $400 trillion.
I know.
That's insane.
It is insane. It is
But
crazy.
no one cares.
No one cares apparently. But a couple of Republicans.
It's like a
in
talking
Congress.
point, and
Yeah.
then it goes away.
Yeah, but I mean, and we saw President Trump visiting the Republican conference,
Yeah.
and saying "Stop talking, get it done."
Yeah,
et
get
cetera,
together
et
on
cetera.
this, yeah.
But the problem is that if this bill passes, it has very important implications for generations, right?
So true.
And we will see what happens in the midterm election, but it affects a lot of people directly, and it pulls and pushes from 11,000 different directions.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it is.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is that every faction of the Republican Party thinks that they're facilitating what Republicans want, right? Moderates are saying, look, we need to win. We have to be able to get the majority. So moderates make the majority, right? So they're giving in on some things. The conservative hardliners, like people like Chip Roy from Texas, are saying, we are sent here to cut spending, right? We finally have unified government, a president with us. Let's cut it. But then the president comes back to Chip Roy and says, we're going to primary you if you don't follow along. That probably stings a little bit. But also, this is sort of, to me, the microcosm of the Republican Party, right? They're not sure what to do here. I mean, we talk about the Democrats being in disarray, and they definitely are, but Republicans are too. They don't have a sense of what they want to do. They're trying to kind of make sure everybody gets a little bit of something, but the end result could be much worse than the individual parts. Right? Some of these cuts are going to hurt one or the other. Republicans are going to try to run on this, like you said, in the next election, but there's a lot here that might be troublesome that they're going to take credit for, but they're also going to have to take the blame for. So that creates a definite problem. It's a microcosm to me of what's next for Trumpism, right? How does Trumpism survive Trump? After he's gone, what does the Republican Party do? Is there a unifying force who can say, look, I want this budget deal done. This is how we're going to do it. I don't think so.
No.
Right? At that point, there's no one to say Chip Roy, we're going to primary you. And Chip Roy says, okay, well, I'll get on board, right? All the moderates and, all the obstructionists, as Trump says, they're all going to say well, I'm going to do what I want to do, right?
Yeah.
In some ways, the Republican majority, the conservative hardliners especially, are acting like they've already lost the majority. There's nothing to lose here. We're just going to go hard and figure out the rest later. But moderates, at least to their kind of credit, say, look, if you don't keep us around, then you're going to lose the majority. And then none of this is going to work.
And this is not a midterm, a medium-term or long-term perspective.
Yeah.
This is November 2026.
So true.
That's it.
Yeah.
And the train already started to do like the coal, and it's like
Start to see that.
Yeah,
Very slowly,
and
yeah.
then poo poo. I mean, it's there.
Well, and then Mike Johnson's at the caboose saying to the moderates with like a pointy stick saying, look, either stay on the train or get off.
Right.
Right. But making them walk the plank like that is a real struggle because they're going to have to go back to their districts very soon and say, hey, look, we got this budget deal done. And the yelling that results will be, look, you cut Medicaid, right, which you said you wouldn't do, right? The kind of tax on tips is going to blow up the budget, although it may actually help people. That's a different kind of concern.
Sure.
And maybe really interesting to see.
Absolutely, 100%. But then on the other hand, you have inflation that is, kind of under control, but not under control. Then you have prices, the economy, who knows what's going to happen. The tariff reprieve with China, the white flag thingy, is going to end in a couple of months.
That's a great point.
So it's still a lot of things in there that affect people directly in their pocketbooks.
Yeah.
And in addition, it's like, oh, by the way.
Yeah.
Like,
we cut like
$25 billion from boom.
Yeah, I can see this being a hard pill to swallow. So we'll see how it comes out, right? Like we said, this is still in flux. Deals aren't totally done yet, and it's got to get past the Senate. So what it looks like at the end may be very different. But at least now, like everyone's kind of on the hook for this if these people are voting for it. Let's talk about Donald Trump and foreign policy for a change. He went to the Middle East with the hope of making some deals and came back with the $400 million plane. What happened?
Well, I think it's a great deal, according to President
Why wouldn't
Trump.
you say yes to the plane?
Right. I mean, and that's what he said.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, you would be stupid to say no to the plane.
If someone gave me a $400 million gift, I would
take it.
Be hard pressed to take it. But here's the thing: I didn't sign an oath to protect the Constitution, which he did. This could be a problem, right?
Yeah, it has, ethical issues. National security issues, security for the president. Air Force One is basically a White House on wheels and wings and that kind of stuff. So,
this feels like a movie, right? That's like going to end badly, like until the hero solves it. One hero, Ted Cruz, right? Ted Cruz said, "Don't take the plane."
Yes.
Other members of Congress said, "I'm not going to ride in that plane." Like all kinds of issues here. So this definitely is concerning. I think from lots of different points of view. But not the least of which is that there's a concern. There's this ethical conflict, which obviously the president's not that worried about because he wants to make deals, right? So they spent a lot of time making deals. Some of it was interesting. One was that he announced basically he was ending sanctions on Syria, and that was something that has been very common since at least the Obama term. So this is a real big change. This is something Trump likes, right? He wants to be seen as kind of this deal maker or somebody who can do things that other people can't do, the kind of Nixon to China kind of moment. It can work under the right circumstances, but there's a lot of people who are worried that this might not work. So that's one thing that they have to kind of think through. Speaking of thinking through all the implications to big policy changes, let's talk Texas. There's a lot happening here. We're going to have to skip a lot of it and just kind of hit a couple of high points. The two high points this week that really kind of came to the front were number one, bail reform, and number two, school finance reform, or school finance funding, really not reform so much. Let's talk about bail. The first, really, there are three measures that are kind of basically now passed. The first was a measure that would make it easier to hold people who are accused of serious crimes without bond pending trial. Another has a constitutional amendment that would deny bail to people who are in the country without legal status. The Constitution generally protects people for bond issues, so there is definitely something here that has to be kind of dealt with. But this is a big win for Greg Abbott, right? This is Greg Abbott's session to me. I mean, the voucher thing is one thing, and this was one of the other big pushes that he wanted. So he's got all of what he wants. There's going to be lots of cries, especially from Dan Patrick, about having a special session for stuff he didn't get that he wanted. But I think Greg Abbott sort of sits back, arms folded, saying, not bad. Right? So, he was on the House floor kind of taking a victory lap in a way. And I think that this for him is basically that, right? It's also an easy issue for Republicans to win on, right? It's easily dramatized. It's something that even Democrats said they wanted. Like after they passed the voucher stuff, like a week later, the Democrats said the only thing left to do is pass bail reform, right? So to some degree, they've kind of acquiesced even to what Republicans want. So what do you make of this?
Well, I mean, I think it's one thing that, as you say, there is, I would say, common bipartisanship feelings in terms of getting this thing done, and very similar to one of having more school finance increases, right? We're talking about around $8 billion right there. And I think that both parties are interested in moving this forward.
Yeah.
If these two things pass in the next couple of days, I think, as you say, that's it for Governor Abbott.
Yeah.
And there's not going to be significant appetite to say, let's call it, and potentially, what else can you add up in a special session? Well, there's a lot of things over there, of course.
Yeah.
But as long as you get, the homestead exemption that is moving forward, bail reform, and then public school finance, I think
it's basically it. You can quibble about details, and Democrats have pushed back on school funding, saying, look, you're increasing the basic allotment by $55. That could eat up in taxes like that, right? So what they said was we need more like $1,000. That's not in the budget, at least as it was. It was never discussed to be that big. But teachers are going to get a raise, and the money that's being infused will help some districts. So this is probably enough to at least placate some people who say that the state isn't spending enough. But there's still big gaps in terms of what they want to do. So, it's a session where not everybody's going to get what they want. That typically happens. A lot of bills died this last week because the House, kind of rules sort of have a limitation on when they can be passed. So a lot of this, of course, still depends on some negotiations with the Senate on a bunch of things, including on THC and whether they'll ban that or not. That debate is this week. We'll find out more about how that goes, but still lots of Rome to happen here in terms of what the session's going to look like at the end.
But in a couple of days, we will know what happened or did not happen.
And next week, we'll spend all of our time talking about what the session meant.
Absolutely. So that's it for this week. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghouse. Thanks for tuning in.